You are Zero, a samurai assassin who kills his enemies in one slice. Zero lives in a small apartment besides some noisy neighbors and a young girl in the 3rd district of New Mecca, inhabited by drug addicts and war veterans. Zero fits neatly into each of these categories as a veteran of the Cro-Mag War and a victim of the combat drug Kronos, although Zero has very little memory of his time in the war. Kronos, created to help New Mecca in the war effort, gives its users a form of time control that allows them to slow down or reverse time. In battle, it allows its users to enter a fight, die, go back in time, and try again. Each day, Zero wakes up from his recurring nightmare in which he, through the perspective of a child, is attacked by a shadowy figure. Then, he leaves his apartment to visit his psychiatrist/contractor/FBI agent/drug dealer. With each mission, more and more information is revealed to Zero about the true nature of his missions and of his past. The final mission of the game finds Zero exploring the bunker of Leon van Albenspin, the creator of Kronos. After a boss fight, Zero is able to use the head of his slaughtered enemy to open Leon's safe, where he discovers a family of 3, the final target of his mission. As Zero approaches the family with his blade drawn, his perception begins to warp, and suddenly he is back in his recurring nightmare. However, instead of seeing the dream from the perspective of the child, Zero takes the place of the attacker. Kill the child, the game demands. We flash to Zero in a bar talking to a fellow veteran who is complaining about resistance against the child killings during the Cro-Mag War. The game continues to prompt Zero to kill the child, until suddenly he is back in the bunker. Zero realizes that in his nightmare, he was not the victim, but rather the attacker, and it was a manifestation of his fragmented memories from his time in the war. Having realized that he was not the good guy he believed himself to be, Zero flees. Zero realizes that he was being lied to all along and confronts his psychiatrist, who is reluctant to give answers. Not feeling ready for another fight, Zero leaves and returns home. ASCIISoft's 2019 release, Katana Zero, explores themes of violence, mortality, and addiction. What makes this exploration especially interesting, however, is its use of time, both mechanically and narratively, to explore these themes. It is no secret that the usage of time is something Katana Zero is trying to get the player to consider. Kronos, the main plot driver of the game, gets its name from the Greek word for time, as well as the name for the personification of time itself. As mentioned earlier, Kronos allows its user to control time. The player can hold shift to slow down time while engaging in the side-scrolling levels placed throughout the neo-noir landscape. This mechanic is helpful when deflecting bullets, dodging lasers, or sliding under fans. Just as Zero feels addicted to the drug, the player initially feels addicted to using the time slow, especially when facing a difficult challenge. It's something the player might not use all the time, but it does give a sense of security to know that the ability is available. Similar to the Dark Souls series, the game justifies the death and respawn of Zero through the drug. Each time the player dies, they are met with a screen that reads, "No, that won't work," and the power of Kronos is used to send the player back in time to the start of the section. When a section is completed successfully, the player is shown a replay of the prior sequence from the perspective of a security camera. This creates an interesting dynamic where each attempt at a level is merely Zero attempting the challenge, while the final attempt seen on the security camera is what really occurred from the perspective of those around him. Especially on more challenging levels, the player is forced to kill over and over and over again. When paired with the swift respawn, it is rare to go more than 1 minute without slicing someone's chest. In a way, this desensitizes the player to the brutal violence of Katana Zero, putting them into the mindset of a soldier. This feeling is amplified by the simplicity of the controls. Other than bosses, no enemy requires more than one hit to kill, leading to extremely fluid and fast-paced play. each kill only needs the click of the left mouse button to slice or parry, or the right mouse button to throw an object. This simplicity makes killing feel not only smooth and easy, but also impersonal. Not to mention, killing just feels cool. The whole game feels like one long recreation of the Old Boy hallway fight scene, further contributing to the desensitization of the player. Katana Zero uses time in its narrative structure to help convey themes of violence, addiction, and mortality. When the player first takes control of Zero, he is on a mission to free a hostage scientist, a typical story for a typical hero. At one point, he even stops to pet a cat. How could he not be the good guy? However, what the player comes to realize is that Zero is possibly the most unreliable narrator in any video game. This is not only due to his limited knowledge of his own life, but also because he is constantly being teleported to different areas and times, leaving the player in the dark about the true order of events and leaving gaps in the story. This can be seen when Zero teleports suddenly from the comfort of his psychiatrist's office to being held captive by a Russian mobster, or when he's having a drink at the bar and in a flash he's the only one left, or perhaps most notably, in the concluding scene I explained earlier. The non-linear narrative structure leaves the player in a constant state of doubt about what they are seeing, as well as the constant fear of what could occur at any moment. Additionally, it contributes to the player's immersion into the mind of Zero, and by extension, the mind of someone who has become reliant on a drug. Zero's drug-induced psychosis manifests itself in the characters of comedy and tragedy. These characters are the human form, or ghost form depending on how you look at it, of the two fundamental genres in storytelling. When the pair first appears, they warn Zero of a future choice that he will be required to make, the choice between life or death, therefore the choice between time and a lack of time. The player is forced to make this choice when they are surrounded by the police in the Chinatown level, and this is where the game diverges into its two main endings. If the player chooses death, comedy and tragedy will disappear, the police will open fire, and the credits roll down the screen, leaving the player in a state of disbelief. If the player chooses life, comedy and tragedy use some sort of Jedi force to kill all of the police, allowing Zero to escape scratch-free and giving the player another couple hours of playtime. The choice the player is presented with uses time in the narrative in the sense that their choice dictates how much time they have in the game, and as a consequence, how much harm the player will do to those around them. However, the game places the player in an interesting dilemma, as, like I said earlier, the game is just so fun, it keeps the player engaged. The game asks the player what they value more, their own enjoyment, or the lives of countless innocent people. Throughout Katana Zero, the game has built up value for the player, causing them to want to continue to play, similar to how Zero values his life and wants to continue to live. Katana Zero uses time and the immersion of the player into the mind of a murderous drug addict to explore themes of violence, mortality, and addiction. Katana Zero uses these themes to protest against war and draws obvious parallels to true events like the Vietnam War. However, it diverges from lots of typical anti-war media in the sense that what it truly focuses on is the mental war that occurs after the physical one.
Skibbity toilet, skibbity skibbity toilet, skibbity toilet, skibbity skibbity toilet, skibbity toilet.